You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network. Because you can handle the truth.
Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, July 9th, 2013, and we got a lot of stuff to talk about today, all kinds of craziness going on in the world. It does feel like these are times of extreme social chaos. Hardly any surprising there. Our phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Manny's in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And kind of an interesting development coming out of the whole NSA Gate spy scandal in the wake of the revelation that the NSA is, in fact, spying on all of us. A lot of Americans are now filing Freedom of Information Act lawsuits against the NSA to see what is in their files. Now, a lot of Americans have already been doing this with the FBI to get their FBI file, but the NSA has taken a very interesting approach. They are rejecting all of these Freedom of Information Act requests by American citizens on the grounds that the data they've collected on your life is now classified information. The details of your life are classified. It's top secret. Nobody's allowed to know what your life is about, not even you whose life it is. In theory, if the NSA is getting it all 100% accurate, they're not going to tell you anything you don't already know. So it kind of makes you wonder just what national secrets they're concealing. The extent of the spying and how much information they've collected on you, or are they perhaps embarrassed that much of what's in their files may be total, complete junk? Because don't forget, a huge part of this data collection comes off your social media, Facebook, Google, MySpace, Twitter, and people do exaggerate. It's not a reliable source of raw intelligence, and there are probably a lot of very goofy things in those files. And NSA is saying, well, we let this stuff out, and they're going to realize how completely pointless all of this was, how useless the data was. That's a good reason for them to say, oh, you can't know what we've got on you is classified top secret because most of it's bovine excrement. We don't want you to know how badly we screwed up with all this expensive intelligence gathering. We are seeing more and more people come up challenging the argument that we, the American people, must sacrifice our personal privacy for security, that somehow the NSA listening in to the sex talk between our serving military overseas and their spouses back home will somehow protect us all from an act of terror. And people are, in fact, demolishing that and saying it's a completely false choice because the NSA is not spying or not able to spy on real threats to the United States of America. Criminals, terrorists, Wall Street inside traders have known all along communications are being monitored, and they are either setting up private lines of communication or they're using their own personally developed codes in order to evade that surveillance. So this NSA spying is all about watching you to find some little scandal they can use to come in and, make a phone call and say you should decide X instead of Y. Or, of course, as we have documented at the Seattle APEC, looking for your business secrets that they can steal and give to their cronies and take over to their brokerages and so forth and so on. So it is a false choice. We don't need to surrender our privacy to be safe from terrorism. In fact, as I've said many times before, the fastest way to stop terrorism is to stop messing around with other people's countries, and the terrorists will go home. And over and above that is the reality that most of these terrorists are government-manufactured fakes, phonies. Adam Gaddan, the American Al-Qaeda, and his real name is Adam Perlman. Yusuf al-Khattab, and his real name is Joseph Cohen. They're all actors to scare you into agreement with this policy of unending war, of conquest, to bring the blessings of private central banking to everybody. We need to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And even the corporate media is starting to question the revealed dogma from the White House that we must surrender our privacy in order to be truly safe. And the fact is, again, demonstrably, by surrendering our privacy, we are less safe. We are wide open to government blackmail. We're wide open to government looting of our business secrets. This scandal with the IRS accidentally, they say, releasing the Social Security numbers of everybody involved with nonprofit organizations proves the government can't be trusted keeping our data safe. We're at greater risk with all this spying that's going on here. And even the corporate media is starting to say, we're not really sure that this makes any sense at all. In fact, just now over on Fox TV, they had this story going on. Is President Obama upholding the law? And is that a trick question? Of course he's not upholding the law. He's breaking the law. The highest law of the land is the Constitution of the United States of America. It is the agreement by which we, the people, allow the government to manage this nation for the benefit of this nation. And anybody in office that does not want to abide by that contract should have the decency to resign immediately. It is a binding contract. It's not just a list of suggestions to be discarded at will. And by ignoring the Constitution, and especially that Bill of Rights, this government has delegitimized itself. That's really what it comes down to. This is an illegal, unconstitutional, illegitimate government trying to cling to power by keeping us afraid of our shadows all the time. Now, getting over to the ongoing saga of Ed Snowden, he's out here with additional information saying that major internet providers like Google and Facebook and Apple gave direct access to the NSA. It's not just a question of the NSA calling over and say, send us all the website requests from anybody reading whatreallyhappened.com. They had wires plugged in directly. So the NSA's computers were constantly polling the computers at Google, Facebook, Apple, and probably pretty much everybody else out there to simply pillage data at will. And all of this, of course, violation of the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable search and seizure without probable cause supported by oath or affirmation. It's a violation of the First Amendment because they're targeting political dissenters. It's a violation of the Fifth Amendment, which says the government can't use your personal resources without just compensation. They're using your internet connection to spy on you. They're using your cell phone. They're using your computers, your tablet. They're using your systems to spy on you, and they're not paying you for it. They're not compensating you for it. That's a violation of the Fifth Amendment. It's a violation of the Ninth Amendment, which guarantees to the American people rights even if they are not explicitly set forth in the Constitution. That's why the right to privacy of the paper mail was extended to telephone lines when they were invented, even though there were no telephones when the Constitution was written. And of course the 10th Amendment, which is intended to bias the government toward the people, says the government can't just assume a new right whenever it feels like it. If it's not in the Constitution, the government's not allowed to do it, which makes everything being done by this Foreign Intelligence Service court completely illegal and un-American. They can't just write laws out of thin air saying it's okay for the government to violate the Constitution. And remember, the United States Supreme Court already ruled in Marbury versus Madison, laws repugnant to the Constitution are automatically null and void. We don't have to wait for the Supreme Court to look at it and say, yes, this is unconstitutional. It is up to we, the people, to decide for ourselves if any of these laws being waved at us by this out-of-control government violate the Constitution. And if these laws do violate the Constitution, we are neither legally nor morally obligated to comply with those laws. It's a complete waste of paper and word processing to put out these laws that defy the Constitution. More and more is coming out about how the government is, in fact, using your own appliances that you bought and paid for to spy on you. Apparently, Motorola polls Droid phone users every 9 minutes to collect your data, where you are, where you're going. Apparently, Motorola, the Droid X2 smartphone, Motorola is capturing passwords, the GPS data, email addresses, usernames. And apparently this data is being sent over an unencrypted HTTP channel, which means anybody running a man-in-the-middle surveillance is getting your information and can use it against you. And again, that underscores the fact that all this spying does not make us safer. It places us more at risks to cyber criminals and people who want to steal our business information, anybody else who wants to do us harm. Now, apparently the U.S. government has been signing all these contracts with the fiber optic cable owners to guarantee continued surveillance. Apparently there was this American cable operator was being sold to a Chinese firm, and the U.S. government interceded and said this Chinese firm can buy this cable company only as long as they have this little cadre of Americans with security clearances inside their company to make sure the spying can proceed unimpeded. So it's out there in the open. Everything that you do online is watched by the government, and I'm not paying much attention to all these privacy groups going to the Supreme Court saying you have to stop this, it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment, because even if the Supreme Court says, yeah, it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment, they can hardly say anything else. Would you trust this government to respond to a Supreme Court decision and saying, you're right, we were wrong, we'll tear it all down? Of course they're not going to. They violated the Constitution to build this system in the first place. They'll go on violating the Constitution and the Supreme Court to keep on using it. And the arrogance that is on display in this issue is just amazing. The Department of Justice has issued a statement in response to questions about these so-called secret rulings by the Foreign Intelligence Service Court. And by the way, I want to hit that word again, Foreign Intelligence Service Court. The FISA Act and its special court's jurisdiction is outside the United States borders. It was never created to have jurisdiction inside the United States. It's operating completely off its charter. But they've come up supposedly with 100 pages of new laws which say why it's okay for the federal government to be peeking in and listening to your sex talk, so they can pass it around and get a giggle out of it without having to actually subscribe to a porn channel on cable TV. And so now the Department of Justice, in a new court filing challenging some of these civil liberty groups in court, is saying the American public has no right to know about the secret laws the federal government says authorizes spying on them. That's their new argument in court. You, the American people, don't have a right to know exactly what laws are out there, until they knock on the door and say, you're in violation of this secret law. Which I guess would destroy that whole ignorance of the law is no excuse, because how can we know about a law that's being kept secret from us? But I have a message to the Department of Justice. If you don't think we, the American people, have a right to know about every single law that you claim to be following in order to break our constitutional rights, then you should have the decency to tear up those paychecks filled with U.S. taxpayer public dollars. How dare you take our money from us and then turn around and say we don't have a right to know what you're doing with it? We own this country. We the people. Go back and look at that Constitution. I know it's probably been years since you looked at it, but it is over there in the National Archives. Just a short stroll, you can look at it. And up at the top, in the largest letters of all, it says, we the people. This country belongs to the American people. 330 million owners. You, the government, are a hired caretaker, a janitor, that we hire and allow to have the keys to keep this place running smoothly. And that does not give you the right to turn around and start abusing the owners of this country. And so for the Department of Justice to take this position that the American people don't have a right to know what laws they claim authorize this spying bespeaks a great degree of arrogance and fear. They know they don't have a case. You can't write a law that bypasses the Constitution. Well, you can, but it's completely meaningless. It's null and void. The government just wants to do what it's doing, and they're trying to figure some way they can sell the American people this idea that you should just shut up, be perfectly happy with all this spying on your life. You can trust the government to take care of your private data, and if you complain about the spying, the terrorists are going to win. Now, remember what I said before about the NSA's classifying all of the information they take on you and not responding to any Freedom of Information Act lawsuits, probably being a cover-up for the fact that the system doesn't really work very well. And apparently, down in Australia, there was a 16-year-old boy was arrested at a Pink concert after he tweeted a reference to Pink's song, Time Bomb. The computer snatched it out of the air. Oh, he's talking about a time bomb. And they went and arrested him, and he's talking about a song. Let's face it, if this constant spying on you really worked the way the NSA claims it does, we wouldn't be getting any more Viagra ads in our email boxes. We wouldn't be getting all these phishing attacks saying, oh, you accidentally paid for a laptop for some total stranger. Click here to sort out your account. That stuff would all be gone. The illegal drug trade would be shut down completely. It doesn't really work. They've wasted a huge amount of your money that could have been spent on the roads, schools, and hospitals. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, one of the groups that is leading the fight against the National Security Agency is the Electronic Frontier Foundation. They've been around for a very long time. They work ceaselessly to guard the privacy of people who are using computers to hold unwarranted, unchecked intrusion at bay. And they are now in the middle of bringing a lawsuit against the NSA for the surveillance programs. And they're challenging this idea of just phishing expeditions and dragnets on everybody's data. And perhaps not surprisingly, the government came in and tried to get the judge to dismiss the case completely on the grounds that exposure of this spying on the American people represents a threat to national security, which it doesn't, because the secret's already out. What allowing this case to move forward does, of course, is it embarrasses the U.S. government. They have been caught red-handed violating the Constitution. They're batting 500 at trashing the Bill of Rights because of this. And look at the excuses they're coming up with to try and contain this thing. You don't have a right to know about these secret laws here. You know, revealing more of the spying to you is a threat to national security. No, it isn't. It's a threat to their own hide. They all know there's a good tarring and feathering on the horizon by an enraged American people who are all of a sudden realizing that the reason they lost this business deal to some competitor with political connections has less to do with the merits of their own bid and more to do with the government peeking in and saying, oh, this guy's going to bid so many $1 million on this contract, so here, you know, buddy of the president, just lower your bid just a little tiny bit less and you'll get the deal. And that stuff goes on a huge amount of time. It gets caught every once in a while, like the Seattle APEC, but for everyone they're catching, there's probably 100 doing it on a regular basis. Now, the federal judge, fortunately, said this whole national security thing just doesn't wash and is allowing the case to move forward. Now, Montana has just passed a law making it a crime for any government to spy on anyone using their electronic devices. This is an historic first. We know the federal government will ignore this law, arguing the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution. And I'd like to make a point here. You should not rely on your local government, your state government, or some claims that the court has slapped the NSA's wrist to guard your privacy. If you have something to hide, and most of you probably do, such as your new cookie recipe that you're going to start a chain of cookie stores with, you have to take it upon yourself to protect your own information from prying eyes, because the government wants to see everything you are doing and take advantage of it. This has nothing to do with crime and terror prevention, because the crimes that this system should result in erasing from our society, like cybercrime, are still here. The drug running is still here. Insider trading and fraud on Wall Street is still here. If the NSA is tapping all of their phones, where are the arrests of all the perpetrators of the mortgage-backed security fraud? This is not about crime and terror. It's about keeping you, the people, in your place, to keep you obedient, to keep you subservient, to keep you working your life away to pay off this artificially created debt. And if you have something to hide, you have to take it on yourself to take steps to guard your data, to guard that cookie recipe, to guard that new invention, to guard your business plan from the eyes of those who have just a reckless disregard and no respect for you at all. I mean, going back to that story where this lady from the NSA, this was reported on ABC no less, said that NSA people were listening to phone calls of our serving troops in foreign lands. They were calling home, talking sexy with their spouse or significant other in what they thought was a private moment. And the NSA is listening to this stuff, and the juicy ones get passed around. Then we have the IRS accidentally releasing all those Social Security numbers for people involved in nonprofits. Provably, this government cannot be trusted with your private data. And so I'm very glad that this judge threw out this whole state secret defense by the government here. And by the way, in the Constitution, there's nothing in there that says the federal government can scream state secret to hide what it's doing from the American people. The Founding Fathers wanted a transparent government. That's why we have the First Amendment right to criticize the government. So the judge threw it out, and I'm rather glad to see that. Now, the other day we were talking about this interactive map showing all these botched paramilitary-style police raids all across the country, each one of which, when it's acknowledged in the corporate media, oh, it was a terrible isolated incident, and of course we know from that map, no, it isn't. It's a common feature of life in America. More about that when we come back from these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're talking about the out-of-control police in this country. And they're not all bad, but there does seem to be a growing percentage who are just openly abusive of the American people. We've got all these YouTube videos we've linked from whatreallyhappened.com, all these incidents where police are just shooting dogs. There's been another one here where an off-duty cop shot his neighbor's dog. Oh, my goodness, he's attacking. Sounds like that old South Park joke from the hunter. Oh, they're attacking me. Boom. And the reality is, in this country, looking at all these paramilitary-style police raids where they go into the wrong home or they fail to announce, they violate their own laws regarding how they're supposed to do a dynamic entry into a home because they suspect there might be a marijuana cigarette in there. And the reality is, when you work out the numbers, you, the American people, are 8 times more likely to be killed by a police officer than by a terrorist. And we're all supposed to be afraid of the terrorists? I'm sorry, it's not really a credible threat. And if you look at the actual rankings, you know, you're more likely to be killed by your own doctor making a mistake than by a terrorist. But we don't see the corporate media saying the police are out of control, the police are a threat to health and safety, which they are. Bad medicines are a threat to the Americans' health and safety. Don't make a big deal about that. Oh, it's all the terrorists. We have to go after the terrorists. No sacrifice is too great to be safe from the terrorists. Well, I'm sorry. If we're supposed to kowtow to the police and they're killing 8 Americans for every 1 American lost to a terrorist, that is not a solution. And we have yet another story of a completely out-of-control police. This is over from the Trenches World Report. And this is a story out of Bloomington, Illinois, where apparently there was this honor student sitting with her friends at the Denny's, just eating, and 2 other people got into a fight at the parking lot. And the cops showed up, and they came into the Denny's just scowling at everybody. And they approached this girl, Gabriella Calhoun, and they said, "Are you part of this?" And they said, "No, we're not part of it. We're just sitting here eating." And then on her way out of the Denny's, she gets grabbed by the police. They put a nightstick across her mouth, breaking her teeth, and put her on the ground, haul her away, and charge her with all these made-up resisting arrest, felony assault stuff. And she was a completely innocent bystander. We have too many military veterans inside the police forces still thinking with the mindset that they're in Afghanistan and Iraq. We have too many American police departments being trained by Israeli trainers who are teaching the police to treat Americans the way the Israelis treat the Palestinians, and we have way too many police officers taking prescription antidepressants that cloud their thinking and trigger a tendency for more violence against the American people. The police are not a benefit to the community because they may be passing out traffic tickets left and right and kicking down doors for people who are growing vegetable gardens in their garage because they don't want to buy GMO food at the supermarket. But the street crime is running rampant, and Wall Street crime even more so. In fact, if Edward Snowden wants to go to some place that is beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement, all he has to do is move to Wall Street. Now, we're getting this story from In These Times here, talking about all this spying and this attitude by the U.S. government. The Army spying program deems all anti-war activists to be domestic terrorists. They're starting to throw that label around recklessly. You know, terrorist was somebody who walked into a building with a bomb and blew it up. Now standing there with a sign saying, "Get out of Iraq. You're a domestic terrorist. And your civil rights are suspended. Once we use that word terrorist on you, we can lock you up and waterboard you." And I did warn, back when these fusion centers and MIAC and all this other stuff was coming on, I said, you be very careful. Do not go along with these violations of the Constitution just because the person being violated has been called a terrorist, because then the government will start calling everybody terrorists, and here we are. Meanwhile, over at MSNBC, who apparently still doesn't understand why their ratings are down in the Al-Qaeda, Lawrence O'Donnell was out there trying to discredit Edward Snowden's last released interview. Oh, you can't believe him. The NSA isn't doing these things. He's un-American. He hates what America is supposed to be. Meanwhile, over at Fox News, one of their discussion boards was laughing at the idea that government should be afraid of the people. Although it is clear at this point the U.S. government is afraid of the American people. That's why they're spying on you. That's why they're buying all this hollow point ammunition. That's why they're buying AR-15s and even M16s for government agencies like the National Weather Service. Like the enraged American people are going to be upset that it rained instead of sunshine, and we're going to attack the National Weather Bureau. And we've all seen government workers, how enthusiastic they are about the job they're supposed to be doing. Do you really expect these people are going to man the barricades to save their managers from an enraged American mob? No. They're going to drop the guns and they're going to run like heck. They're going to save their own rear ends. These are not people with a demonstrated moral strength to say, I'm right, I'm willing to fight and die for it. They're going to run. We'll pick up all those guns and we'll sell them surplus after it's all over. Never fired, only dropped once. Now, inevitably, and I think this is the reason why Barack Obama is back on global warming, because he doesn't have anywhere else to stand, but all of these revelations, NSA Gate, Benghazi Gate, IRS Gate, DOJ Gate, Prism Gate, all of these gates, the American people's faith and trust in Obama is plummeting. And that's probably a good thing. I think we've hit the stage where the vast majority of the American people, whenever there's something else comes out from the government or the corporate media, they presume it's more of the same bovine excrement they've had shoveled at them for the last 10, 20 years. This government has lost the trust of the American people. And trust is a very, very fragile thing. You can take a century to build a climate of trust between government and the people, and you can lose it overnight with a single, clumsy, obvious lie, like Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. Now, to add to all of the other gates that are flooding up around this administration, apparently a Texas law firm representing a whistleblower from the Department of State was broken into. It's a law firm, Shulman and Matthias, and it was burglarized, and all that was taken were the computers. There were other valuables in the office that were untouched. Now, 2 individuals were caught on the security camera footage. They broke into the building, went right for the offices of Shulman and Matthias, took the computers, and basically this is all about this State Department whistleblower, Aurelia Fednizen, who basically released documents accusing top officials at the Department of State of covering up allegations that State Department employees had engaged in sexual assault, drug use, solicitation of underage prostitutes at various embassies around the world. And by the way, they've had another embarrassment down at the embassy in Guyana. They got a State Department employee there, was trading visas for sex, and apparently was tied in with the local drug smugglers to get them the paperwork to smuggle their drugs into the United States of America. So think Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office break-in or the Watergate office break-in. We are into Nixon territory here when they're doing that kind of thing. Along, of course, with Michael Hastings, and even the corporate media is starting to say, yeah, the official story really doesn't make sense when you have got wreckage from the car before the tree that the car ran into. Tells you the car came apart before it hit the tree. And that means there was a bomb. Now, we have talked many, many times before about how the FBI is really good at breaking up terrorist plots they themselves created. They'll have some undercover informant go out there and say, I'm going to blow up whatever. And I've got money and equipment. I'll give you the money if you'll help me do it. And they find some patsies desperate for money who are, of course, inevitably Arab Muslim. And they say, here, I'll give you money if you help me. And they'll say, all right, give me the money and I'll kind of help you. Doesn't mean they're necessarily going to do it. They're just taking the money. And then, of course, then the feds swoop in, arrest them, and we've got the banner headlines, another terrorist Muslim plot uncovered by the FBI. And then 6 months down the road, the judge throws it out as an obvious case of entrapment, but they've got their headlines, and that's all they really want. When you hear the word terrorist, you will think Arab Muslims. So somebody did an actual study and found out that of all these so-called terrorists arrested by the FBI since 9/11, only 1% of them were genuine people planning a crime against the American people. The other 99% were manufactured out of thin air by the FBI to wave at you to remind you that the terrorists are the Arab Muslims. So forth and so on. By the way, over in Britain, there's a comedian who goes by the name of Frankie Boyle. And earlier in the day, Barack Obama, or whoever's doing this for on his behalf, tweeted to Obama's Twitter account, I wish Muslims across America and around the world a month blessed with the joys of family, peace, and understanding. Relative to Ramadan, Frankie Boyle replied, the ones you're force-feeding in Guantanamo or the ones you're bombing, which I think cuts right to the chase there. Now, here's another embarrassment from the TSA, which is probably the United States' second most hated agency after the Internal Revenue Service, and this has to do with a wounded war veteran. He was wounded in Iraq with an improvised explosive. He's a decorated veteran. He was on his way to receive a second honor up in Sacramento, California, and the TSA stopped him and gave him a ration of abuse because he couldn't raise both of his hands over his head inside the body scanner. Why? Well, because one of his arms kind of got messed up in service to the United States. And they just harassed him and made him take off his uniform because, oh, there's too much metal on there, we can't tell what's going on. And they literally stripped this guy, wounded American veteran hero, stripped him down at the airport while he's on his way to receive another honor for his service to this country. So all of you out there who wear the uniform of the United States of America, take a look at how you're treated. Even after you've been wounded in service to this country, look at how you're being treated. Look at how your private phone calls to your spouses and significant others are being listened to by the NSA, who are keeping collections of the sexiest of the sex talk to share around the water cooler. Ooh, this one's really hot. You're going to like, wait till you hear what she says she wants to do to this guy. This is what you're fighting and risking your life for? Remember the law of the hammer? If you give a small boy a hammer, everything he encounters requires pounding. Same thing applies to politicians. If you give a politician the power to make laws, everything they encounter needs legislating. And Florida is a good example of why this gets out of control sometime. Because the Florida Senate just passed a bill supposedly to control online gambling and internet cafes, which they see as a bad thing. People can use a computer that we can't trace them to. And this legislation was signed into law by Florida's Governor Rick Scott. And now that it went all the way through the Florida legislature and past the governor's desk, and now it's the law in Florida, they realize the way it was written effectively bans all computers in the state, not just ones at the internet cafe, because the bill bans any device that might be used for online gambling, even if it isn't. And that means every computer in the state of Florida is now illegal. Use a computer, go to jail. Now we're going to get all this nonsense about computers under control. So I'm sure the law will quickly be repealed or struck down, but I mean, it shows a complete disregard for what they're actually doing. They get a cause, we must control online gambling. And they just throw together some legislation. They're not paying attention to what they're doing. Probably it's all being written by their intern staffers who are there trying to get a job in government, and they're working for free, and they're not paying attention. And it got all the way past the governor before anybody realized that the way it was written banned all computing devices in Florida. Smartphones, tablets, laptops, desktop computers are now all technically illegal in the state of Florida because they might be used for online gambling. And that itself is a trend we should be concerned about. The idea of banning something because it might be used for ill, which of course is the big push of the gun grabbers. You know, we've got to ban guns for all Americans because they might be used for bad things. But you could say the same thing about ball-peen hammers. You could say the same thing about rope. You could say the same thing about baseball bats or glass bottles or kitchen knives. These are all items that have legitimate, useful purposes, except maybe baseball bats. And we shouldn't take them away from people who are using them to do something pleasurable or useful on the off chance that one individual out of their mind on SSRIs is going to do something bad with it. It's just absurd what they're doing. Now, as I mentioned before, the IRS is reeling from multiple scandals, the most recent of which was the supposed accidental publishing of Social Security numbers for everybody involved in nonprofits on a publicly accessible database, which means all of those individuals are now going to be targeted by identity thieves, who apparently are able to work with impunity despite all this NSA spying. And over at Ex Republic TV, Darla DeWald is basically saying it's time to abolish the IRS and send these government agency workers to get a real job. A lot of potholes in the road need filling in. Let's get something useful out of these guys here. And I'm not, this isn't even getting into the revelation that the 16th Amendment, on which all of this income tax is based, was never actually ratified. The Infernal Revenue Service is on the same moral level as Sir Guy of Gisborne's thugs roaming the countryside stealing pigs and chickens. They don't really have a law to back up what they're doing because the original Constitution prohibited a direct, non-apportioned tax on Americans. And the 16th Amendment that supposedly overrode it was never ratified, and even if it had been ratified, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Stanton versus Baltic Mining, the 16th Amendment did not actually confer any new taxing authority on the Congress. They lied to you. They lied to your parents. They've lied to every American going back 100 years to get your money. Not a huge revelation when we remember that whopper about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, but it's a completely out of control government. They just see you as nothing more than a resource to be harvested to make themselves rich and comfortable. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and just now looking at a story that came in from Ex Republic TV, how U.S. and German officials are already discussing how they're going to protect their politicians if more of this surveillance program becomes public knowledge. So they're on the defensive here. They know they're in trouble. German people are angry with the German politicians for spying on the German people. The American people are angry with the American government for spying on the American people. And they're already thinking, what are we going to do to protect the politicians? Well, we'll put the politicians in one of these underground bunkers and we'll ring it with tanks that will set fire to any one of the serfs who dares stand up and says, you're doing wrong, because we're the government and we're always right, even when we're wrong. The U.S. government right now is acting like a wounded animal trapped in a corner, and of course that makes it very, very dangerous, because desperate people will take desperate chances to cling to power or to avoid that tarring and feathering they so richly deserve here. Meanwhile, the non-aligned movement has come out and jointly condemned France, Spain, Portugal, and Italy over the handling of the aircraft by Bolivian President Evo Morales, and denouncing it correctly as a grave violation of his diplomatic immunity. And even under United States law, heads of states are deemed immune. You don't touch them. And yet the U.S. went in and said, by golly, we're going to force you down because we think Snowden's on your plane. Turned out not to be true. Huge, huge embarrassment. The Bolivian government is very angry. There are thousands of protesters outside the U.S. Embassy in Bolivia demanding it be shut down, and I think that's probably likely to happen. Meanwhile, not having learned from that embarrassment, Washington is already out there saying that Edward Snowden will not be allowed to travel to any other country but the United States. He's still in Russia, as far as we know, and the U.S. is literally telling the rest of the world, don't you dare fly Snowden anywhere but the U.S. The implied threat being they will intercede any aircraft they think Snowden is on and force it down or shoot it down in order to get this most hated, wanted man in the world. And again, the U.S. government is doing more damage to its credibility and legitimacy in their reaction to Snowden than Snowden did himself. Now, we're getting some mixed signals about a possible asylum deal involving Venezuela. Earlier today, we knew that Venezuela had offered asylum to Snowden. There was one report out of Russia Snowden had accepted, then they sort of pulled back and hemmed and hawed. There are possible interpretations for that, one being that obviously Snowden doesn't want the U.S. to know which asylum offer he's accepting in order to avoid having whatever plane he's on be intercepted and forced to the ground. But if I were Vladimir Putin, and in light of the clear U.S. threat to intercept any passenger aircraft carrying Snowden, I would put Snowden on a Russian military transport to fly him to whatever nation is going to accept him with fighter escort, because it's one thing for the U.S. to force down a civilian aircraft, and quite another to risk a direct confrontation between the U.S. military and the Russian military. We'll be back after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Over in Egypt, the situation is deteriorating rapidly, and it has not been made any better by a video that surfaced showing a military sniper firing into a protesting crowd in Cairo. And it looks like it could devolve into an outright civil war between the pro-Morsi faction and those who were trying to get Morsi out. And it's going to destabilize the entire region even further than it already is. And it's another reminder that the U.S. policy in the Mideast has broken down. All this attempt to conquer or regime change and somehow bring all of the Middle East into compliance with the petrodollar, private central banking, and kissing up to Israel has failed. And because of what happened in Egypt, over in Turkey, which is still dealing with their massive protests over there, Erdogan is now realizing that it's a real possibility he could be given the old heave-ho. Now, Egypt and Turkey were considered key assets for the upcoming invasion of Syria. And now the reliability and dependability of those countries as forward bases is up in the air. And that's why we're seeing this reshuffling down to Jordan to conduct a land war into Syria from down there in Jordan. But it's definitely all falling apart down there. Meanwhile, we're looking over at Indonesia. Hasn't been in the news all that much, but it looks like they're on the verge of a mass public protest against corporate plunder and slave labor working conditions. All it needs is a spark. This push for a global fascist dictatorship called the New World Order, enslaved to a global currency loaned by a private central bank at interest, has set the stage for a global revolution against the money junkies. Over in Eastern Europe, we're starting to see the smolderings of public discontent with an economy ravaged by private central banking. Meanwhile, over in Beirut, almost predictably, there was another mass bombing on the eve of Ramadan. At least 53 people were wounded from this car bomb in Beirut's southern suburbs. And already the former Prime Minister of Lebanon is saying, of course it's Israel, because this is what they do. Now, up in Afghanistan, apparently the Afghani people's desire for the U.S. to go is starting to gain traction, and Hamid Karzai, now that he is actually the head of that country that he himself supported invading back when he was part of UNOCAL, going before the Congress, saying, we've got to change the government of Afghanistan so we can get our oil pipeline cheaper, and look at the bright side, you'll be able to have all the opium that your drug lord buddies want to sell. And ever since then, there's more and more split and friction. Now Obama is talking about a complete pullout from Afghanistan, because they're running out of resources, and they've got to redirect them, I think. It's kind of hard to take anything Obama says about Afghanistan anymore. Back in 2008, he said if he became president, first thing he was going to do was end the wars and bring our kids home. It was more than 4 years ago, hasn't happened. Then he was talking about we need to extend past 2014. Now he's talking about a complete pullout. I'm starting to wonder if maybe Obama is setting federal policy with a dartboard in the Oval Office. Now, a little bit of good news. Finally, a suit against Israel has reached the International Criminal Court over the deaths of the Mavi Marmara during the humanitarian aid flotilla. We'll talk about that more when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. If you want to be a pirate, go to Wall Street. They're flying the Jolly Roger there like crazy, and they don't care who sees it here. Now, before we went to the commercial break, we're talking about Israel's attack on the humanitarian aid flotilla, trying to take food, medicine, crayons, coloring books, that sort of thing, to the Palestinians in Gaza back in 2010. And Israel's military forces intercepted this flotilla in international waters, boarded the ships, and killed a bunch of people who were unarmed. Israel was screaming, they had metal poles, they had kitchen knives, we had the machine gun. And of course a video surfaced showing that this 17-year-old American was lying on the deck helpless when an Israeli soldier shot him in the head. Clear case of execution. So lawyers representing the victims have taken the case to the International Criminal Court in The Hague, and they're suing on behalf of the Union of Comoros, which is the nation whose flag was being flown by the Mavi Marmara at the time of the raid. Now, a lot of pressure was put on Turkey. Don't make a fuss. Just, it's only 8 of your people. Who cares about that? You'll breed more of them, in the coming years. And Turkey knuckled under, which is probably one of the reasons why the Turkish people are extraordinarily angry with Erdogan right now. And but the Union of Comoros is not succumbing to pressure to back off. And they're suing Israel for the illegal attack on their ship in international waters without cause. And it will be interesting to see what The Hague does with this case. Of course, we know Israel's going to be screaming anti-Semites, and the U.S. is going to be screaming, no, 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 you can't hurt our friend in the Middle East. You know what they say, justice delayed is justice denied. They're going to drag this thing out like crazy. Meanwhile, yesterday, apparently 200 Israeli settlers stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque here at the beginning of Ramadan. It's a clearly provocational move. And the Israeli police were protecting them when they went in and harassed and insulted the Palestinian worshippers. They're trying to provoke a response. So Israel can say, oh, those gosh darn Palestinian Arab Muslims, we must retaliate. Now, just for a moment, imagine that you were at your church in the middle of your conversation with your imaginary playmate. And you take that stuff very seriously. And a crowd of 100 people from a different religion came in to hurl insults at you in your place of worship, and they were being protected by the police. How would you respond to that? You're there in your, hypothetical, it's a Protestant church, and all of a sudden 100 people who believe in the flying spaghetti monster or the magic pink unicorns, and they run in and they scream at you that you're evil, that you're heretical, that refuse to see the universe the way they think you ought to, and they're being protected by the local police. How would you feel about that? Clearly, Israel is trying to provoke a crisis that they can exploit to get their war agenda back on track. Meanwhile, over at Brooklyn College, they have fired one of their professors, Christopher Peterson Overton, because his coming course in Middle East history and politics wasn't sufficiently pro-Israel. And apparently New York State Assemblyman Dov Hikind personally interceded, sent a letter to Brooklyn College President Karen Gould saying this guy's an overt supporter of terrorism, and got him fired. Now, it must be great living in Dov Hikind's district where there's no crime, the economy is healthy, everybody has a job, everybody has a home and plenty to eat, the infrastructure is in good order, so that this Dov Hikind has plenty of time left over to go over to Brooklyn College and scream about professors who don't teach history the way a foreign government thinks it ought to be taught. This is subversion of our educational system to a foreign government's agenda. I remember when I was a kid in public school, we got all the little film strips warning us about communist subversion of our government, of our educational system, of our society, trashing our most treasured American institutions and traditions. And it turns out we were being subverted, but we were looking in the wrong direction. But our eyes are open now, and I think more and more people realize what's been going on. We have a government that has cheerfully, gladly sold us out to that foreign government in exchange for 30 pieces of silver. Meanwhile, getting back over to the Zimmerman case, it is still being, given a huge amount of coverage and commentary in the corporate media, and it's very alarming to see the corporate media just basically out there taking the position there's no question Zimmerman is guilty, and sort of pre-selling the idea that he's guilty so that if he's acquitted, which a lot of people watching the actual trial are saying, yeah, the prosecution just handed this to the defense. If Zimmerman is acquitted by that jury, they're almost amplifying that it's injustice, it's a travesty. And we're still seeing all this flood of postings out on Facebook and Twitter saying, oh, if Zimmerman's let go, we ought to have riots. And again, this is exactly what the U.S. government needs right now. They're desperate. They're in a panic. The American people are angry over IRS Gate. They're not accepting the official story on Benghazi Gate. They're angry at DOJ Gate, spying, PRISM, all of that stuff. The American people are angry. And what does the U.S. government do when the American people are angry with it? It creates a distraction. It creates a crisis. It tries to divide Americans against each other, whites against blacks, youngs against old, men against women. We've seen that tactic used time and time again. If Zimmerman is acquitted and riots result in multiple cities, that's all Obama needs to declare a national state of emergency and martial law, which will mean a gun grab. Oh, the rioters are using guns to whatever. Well, maybe some of the people are using guns to keep the rioters from looting their stores. We saw that in Los Angeles during the Rodney King riots, following the equally bogus acquittal of the 4 officers who beat him to a pulp, in a case in which the judge literally made it impossible for the jury to find these officers guilty. And our federal government would love nothing better than a small civil uprising they can brutally crush down in order to discourage a general mass uprising by the entire American people that they could not hope to deal with any more than Mubarak did or Morsi did. And maybe Erdogan is going to be next. But I'm very concerned about how much coverage they're giving this story, and how the commenters are literally trying to create this public conception that Zimmerman is guilty beyond all shadow of a doubt, and all this social media propaganda saying if Zimmerman's let go, there should be riots. There should not. Telling you right now, in your social circle, that kid who's filling up the bottles with gasoline and tying rags around the top is an undercover government informant whose job it is to trick you into doing something the government can use to justify erasing what's left of the Bill of Rights. Please don't fall for it. Please share this with all the people you know. It's another government fraud, another hoax, another false flag. Please do not be as stupid as the federal government thinks you are. Don't fall for it. Meanwhile, apparently later on this month, the New York Police Department, in conjunction with the Department of Homeland Security, is going to be running a terrorism drill involving multiple gas attacks in the subway system. And the reason we're paying attention to this is we know that all of these false flag terror attacks always take place superimposed over an ongoing drill. That's why FEMA was in New York the night before 9/11, ready to go. And the 7/7 London subway bombing happened right on top of a drill that was drilling for exactly that kind of attack in exactly that location, exactly at that time. And I know drills go on all the time, but any one of these drills could be a setup for a false flag attack, and they get up there to that last minute, and then they say, all right, green light, make it real. Here's an interesting little story. This is out of Milwaukee, where the BATF was using a building for an undercover sting. They ran this phony store trying to lure criminals in, and they called the store Fearless Distributing. And it was a huge Charlie Foxtrot because the place was burglarized. One of the agent's guns, including a fully automatic machine gun, was stolen from his car. They never got that one back. The store itself, this is a BATF front, and the burglars broke in, took $40,000 in merchandise. And it turned out when they finally moved out, the landlord of the building realized the BATF had trashed the place. Broken doors, broken walls, unpaid utility bills, and the carpet was ruined because they'd let a toilet overflow. And he submitted a bill to the BATF for repair costs. The BATF said no. And the landlord, David Salkin, kept pushing the issue, and an ATF attorney warned him, do not contact the BATF anymore, or it'll be considered threatening a federal agent. In other words, yes, we came in and wrecked your place, but if you complain about it, you're threatening a federal agent and we will arrest you. That, of course, was made public. The BATF has now apologized and they've settled out of court. But it shows the arrogance of power that has come to curse this nation. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we were talking about military spending, and there's that famous clip from HBO's The Newsroom where the protagonist is answering the question, what makes America the greatest nation on earth, by saying, we're not the greatest nation on earth, not anymore. We're an empire in decline. And he goes on to talk about how America spends more on the military than the next 26 nations combined, 25 of whom are supposed to be allies. And we corrected that yesterday with another study that shows that right now, when you include all the sort of off-book spending that goes out through private military contractors, that the United States is spending more money on its military than the rest of the world combined. But are we getting our bang for our buck, so to speak? And certainly from all the thrashing and trouble that we're having in all these ongoing wars, now that we're actually in World War III already, you have to wonder about it. And we know from decades of scandals how military procurement is just, it's completely corrupted. It's all about money, and the weapon systems that are delivered for our kids to actually use turn out to be not very good. And over the weekend, we had yet another test of the ballistic missile intercept system, where they fired a test rocket from Vandenberg, simulating an inbound ballistic threat. And this giant floating radar that is normally parked here in Pearl Harbor was out there trying to send it mid-course corrections. And the interceptor fired from Kwajalein Atoll missed it completely. And they've only been able to score a 50% interception during all these tests. The last time they successfully intercepted was back in 2008. And that is a condition in which the people operating the radar and the interceptor know when and from what direction the inbound threat is coming. And they have been caught with radio beacons on these simulated incoming warheads, which is a courtesy no real attacker is going to hand to us. And it completely missed. Now, we've been talking about the F-35, which is turning into a huge boondoggle. It has cost more to develop this airplane. They've been trying to get it off the ground working properly for 10 years now. It's cost more than the gross domestic product of all of Australia to develop this thing. And what they've wound up with is this over-bloated, junked-up, gizmo-heavy behemoth, which is far heavier than it was supposed to be, much slower than it was supposed to be, can't fly in the rain, can't fly in the fog, not all that stealthy, can't fly near lightning or the electronics quit working, and they still have not been able to get the helmet-controlled fire control aiming system to work correctly. And so what has the Pentagon done when they are caught having spent this much money on something which even the Pentagon says will not survive a dogfight with its Russian contemporaries? They change the requirements. They can't get this plane to meet its original objectives, so they're solving the problem by rewriting the desired specifications for the F-35. They're taking what the plane can actually do and say, this is what we wanted all along. I guess it's Zen weapons development. You build the weapon and then you put write the specifications around it. And we look at situations like this where we're talking trillions of dollars spent for weapons that are far less effective than those being produced at much lower cost by other countries. And so the idea that the U.S. is spending more on its military than any other country may not be a guarantor of eventual military victory. If they're putting junk out there that doesn't work. We were talking about these three underway replenishment vessels, I forget their name, that the instant they were created, they were immediately sent to be scrapped because they'd been built so badly. The so-called littoral combat ships that are supposed to be stealthy, and the Pentagon is saying they're not going to work. They're underarmed, under-armored. Its electronic control systems are wide open to interference and outside hacking. All this very expensive stuff, and it's really not very effective. And the U.S. government wants to send your kids into combat with this stuff. And it's all graft and corruption. Remember, we're talking about the recommended body armor for soldiers, which came from this one provider who's made so much money off of all this stuff. He threw his daughter a $10 million bat mitzvah party. And his body armor isn't all that good. It deteriorates over time. But soldiers who want to trade in their U.S. government-issue body armor for the more reliable dragon skin, which, by the way, is what the officers are wearing, were told if they did not wear the recommended body armor and they were killed, their families would not get the death benefits. I know when my nephew was serving over there in Iraq, and this whole story about how the body armor really wasn't all that effective was coming out, we all talked about pooling together among the family to buy him some dragon skin. And he was told, you can't have the dragon skin. You will buy this. It's from our good buddy. And yes, you are more likely to get killed wearing that, but we'll give some money to your family to make up for it. So it's all driven by the money. And the United States may have invested all this money in the military and not really have that good of a military, to tell by the F-35 and the ballistic missile intercept system. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And boy, the volume on that one was so low, I thought I was going deaf out there. So we're looking at this surveillance state, and it's getting worse. We know there are drones all over the United States, and now they're starting to openly discuss weaponizing them. Keep the masses under control. Have you noticed how the U.S. government is now treating the American people the way they treat the people of Yemen and Afghanistan and Pakistan? Is that the kind of nation you wish to leave to your children? I don't think so. And it's kind of weird because Obama a while back was, saying, we've got to worry about the kind of nation we're leaving to our children. We are worried about that, Obama. We absolutely are. Now, let's talk about the economy a little bit. By the way, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. I know you're out there. A lot of commentary about how the euro crisis is returning. This is from over at UPI. I would argue that the crisis has been there all along, and it didn't go away. It was merely hidden because of the brouhaha over austerity, which turns out not to be working, and plenty of instantly created ink and paper to try and paper over the fundamental flaws in the model of private central banking issuing the public currencies alone at interest. And UPI is describing what's going on in Europe as almost a form of torture for the people living there, a death by 1,000 cuts. Every day goes by, something else is taken away that you thought you were paying taxes for. Good roads, good schools, good hospitals. The money's taken away from you and it's handed to the private central bankers. And the bill is going up, and it cannot do otherwise because under that model of a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, total aggregate debt grows faster than total aggregate money supply with which to pay that debt, and it cannot be otherwise. There is no possible outcome other than eventual collapse. And when the collapse occurs, all the real wealth of the nation and its people is in the hands of those private central bankers. And of course, the instant Europe starts coming apart, all those $90 trillion in credit default swaps sold by Wall Street against Europe's debt will come due. And because derivatives are not regulated the way regular insurance is, Wall Street doesn't have the cash reserves to make good on those credit default swaps. I mean, they're piling up huge cash surpluses in their vaults with all this instantly created money coming out of quantitative easing. They're taking the money and they're sitting on it. They're not putting it back out into circulation, which is why we're not seeing as much in the way of inflationary pressures right now. But they're sitting on that money, and it's still not enough. And when Europe starts to default, it's kind of hard to imagine what Wall Street will do. Now remember, Wall Street relies on one of its own controlled expert organizations to determine when a default has happened. And they may just do the whole, oh, it's not really a default, it doesn't qualify for payment of the credit default swaps because of this technicality, but that will destroy the world's little remaining trust in Wall Street, and people will start dumping stuff left and right. Wall Street could, probably will, turn around to the U.S. federal government. We need more bailouts. We need $90 trillion in bailouts from the American people. And the U.S. government's going to come back and say, they don't have any more. We've looted them for everything they have. There is no more. So the Federal Reserve will just print up $90 trillion out of thin air, dump it on the world market, and that'll crash the dollar. There is no way out of this mess. And the reason we're in this mess is because Wall Street behaved like Wall Street always has, and the U.S. government, which is supposed to keep an eye on these things, looked the other way. We're going to take a phone call here. John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Yeah, I want to visit the attack on the Mavi Marmara, the aid ship that was heading towards Gaza and was in international waters. What I want to make a comment is that Turkey is a member of NATO.
Yes.
And Israel is not. It refuses to sign up to that treaty, the NATO treaty. But I am surprised that Turkey did not invoke Article 4, which calls upon all nations to come to a member state who is under attack. And it calls on all the member nations to come to their aid. Why did it not occur?
Well,
my
it probably
suggestion is that
it probably did occur. Go ahead.
My suggestion is that if Turkey had invoked Article 4, so many nations would have ignored that article of the treaty that NATO would have fallen apart.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I'm sure that Turkey realized that the member nations of NATO, even though Israel's not part of NATO, Israel has as much control over all of those NATO nations as they do over the United States of America and Canada, and the issue was a non-starter.
Absolutely, Michael. But it still amazes me that this is not being pushed out in the media, because it was international waters. It wasn't an act of piracy. It was an act of war on a sovereign flagged ship. It was to be considered part of Turkish territory.
Well,
and yet
technically it was under the flag of the Union of Comoros, but it's Comoros sovereign territory, and I think the fact that the ship wasn't flying the flag of Turkey was another reason why Turkey was impeded from going to NATO. But I remember at the time it was discussed, not because of the ship and its flag, but because of the Turkish nationals who were murdered by Israel. And, of course, there was also a young American on board who was killed by the Israelis, and our government's reaction was, the Israelis can kill as many Americans as they want. We didn't kick up a fuss when they murdered 30-some-odd of our service people on the attack on the USS Liberty. Why should we care now about this one 17-year-old kid from New York?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's atrocious that nothing was done.
I agree.
To actually hold to account, and I'm hopeful that this case being brought in the International Criminal Court in The Hague will see some sanction on the Israeli military for their actions.
Well, I would like to see it, but again, I think for political reasons, probably at best it'll be a wrist slap and a symbolic decision. Because Israel is no more likely to comply with any declarations from the International Criminal Court than they comply with resolutions coming out of the United Nations.
Absolutely. We know their record is pretty dismal on that, 164 substantive resolutions, everyone ignored.
Yeah, it's, it's very obvious Israel sees itself as above the rule of law, above the rule of international law, and again, they've got their talons into all of the Western governments, certainly all of them with private central banks, and they are in fact calling the shots. And Ariel Sharon was not engaging in pointless bravado when he told Shimon Peres, "We, the Jewish people, control America, and the Americans know it."
Yep. Well, I mean, from where I sit and talking to a lot of my friends, the Western governments, and particularly the governments of France, Britain, and America, are becoming a laughingstock for all their machinations over various issues, including all these revelations about PRISM, about Benghazi, about the IRS. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree. It is absolutely, absolutely ridiculous. It's embarrassing. For our nation to just constantly kowtow to this foreign government. The government gets caught spying on the American people. Remember the big spy scandal that was uncovered just before 9/11? And our government's response is, let's get them out of there. Just send them back to Israel. And it's a huge embarrassment. Meanwhile, of course, they're out there violating all these diplomatic principles, trying to get Edward Snowden. How dare he tell the American people the truth about what the government is doing? So it is completely corrupted. It would be a laughing matter if this was not our own country that we're watching being subverted and destroyed. And I think for the people living in those countries, the world may be laughing at them, but the people in those countries aren't laughing alongside them. It is... it's embarrassing. It's humiliating to see our president and our politicians. It's like almost become a ritual. Anybody who wants to run for office in the United States, what's the first thing they do? They go off to Israel and they get their picture taken by the Wailing Wall. It's humiliating.
Well, I want to comment on other items, like, for example, your naval buildup in the Gulf. and the British naval build-up and French and so forth. I mean, to be quite clear, these huge ships, they might as well paint a big red roundel on the side for the Yakhont and other missiles that are ensconced all the way along the Iranian coast. I mean, this is ridiculous. There are so many problems in the world, we don't need another war.
Well, unfortunately for the people in charge of all these countries, they see another war as their best option out. And certainly the history of the United States of America, every time the bankers get this economy into a total Charlie Foxtrot, they gin up a war to get out of it. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008. And technically we're already into World War III. The U.S. has invaded a dozen countries on 2 continents. That's a world war.
Well, if your definition of a world war is more than 2 or 3 countries at war with each other, then we're definitely at a world war, and we've been in this world war for 10 years or more.
We definitely have. We're just waiting for the big bang where everybody will wake up and say, oh, yes, it's a world war, and, you know, rock and roll, full tilt, boogie, afterburner, overdrive. But I'm certain that future historians looking back from 50 years hence will say, yeah, the world was already at a world war at this stage in history. Just if you go back and you look at the history of World War II, and you realize that before Pearl Harbor, there were already all of these little tiny skirmishes that were going all over Asia, all over Japan, all over Europe. But Pearl Harbor sort of united it all together and said, yes, we're rock and rolling and it's a world war.
Well, I mean, from what I've learned recently, the British government was planning the invasion of Syria ages before this so-called rebels began their campaign. They were planning the invasion of Libya. They're planning the invasion of Iraq, the first one and the second one. Mm-hmm. And it seems all these things are pre-planned on a schedule.
They were. General Wesley Clark blew the lid off the schedule, but they were looking to have this all completed by 2008. And here we are in 2013, and the situation is faltering. So the plan isn't working out too well. But I look at the very obvious bogus nature of this Syrian revolution, and I see it as part of that plan to destabilize and overthrow Syria from within. You know, because I think at this point in the history, the people of the world are very tired of these all-out frontal invasions and attacks on countries. And so the plan is being modified. How can we invade these countries from within? How can we take them down in a way that we hijack the Arab Spring and we say, oh, we had nothing to do with what happened in Libya. It was the Arab Spring. And they're trying to do that again in Egypt right now. But there's no question the world is in turmoil all across the face of the globe. And it all comes back to this predatory private central banking and this long historically documented habit by the bankers to resort to war to keep the world enslaved to their little Ponzi scheme.
Absolutely. I entirely agree, Michael. If we keep informing people of this central banking system, then what I call a Babylonian system, really, the printing of paper and loaning it to the people as a loan at interest, and it's printed out of thin air, backed by nothing. This is why the BRICS and the Chinese are now of such interest to the NSA and all these other agencies.
Absolutely. The NSA is not working for the United States government or the American people. It's working for the Federal Reserve.
This is what I take from all these actions. Yeah, absolutely, it's working for the bankers and Wall Street.
Well, there's kind of a lot of overlap there as well, but that's exactly it. This whole new world order plan is trying to create a global fascist dictatorship with a global central bank that will issue the global currency as a loan at interest to permanently trap humankind in slavery to artificially created debt out of thin air. That's the future of mankind these people are working towards.
Well, I mean, I've heard lots of people calling it the New World Order. From where I sit, it's the old world order, just revamped.
You're right. It's serfdom. We're going from the American dream of people owning the land back to the feudalist ideal of the land owning the people.
Yep. Okay then, Michael. I'll let you get on.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. And Barbados is a very, very beautiful place. I remember it fondly, especially that Monget rum. All righty. Getting back to Europe and the economy. You would think that Greece would sort of learn from past mistakes, certainly those of past administrations, but apparently the Greek government is hiring Goldman Sachs and the international Rothschild banks to try and save Greece, which strikes me as insanity because it was a prior deal with Goldman Sachs that doubled Greece's debt without bringing any benefits to the people of Greece. And it is these Rothschild central banks that have plunged the world into artificially created debt by issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. And it is rather amazing and alarming that these so-called leaders of our nations can't or won't see that as the root cause of all the problems. Well, they'll run around and scream about fixing it, but they don't ever really fix the problem. They don't want to because their own personal financial interests are tangled up with keeping the world enslaved to this debt-based currency system. Meanwhile, over in Russia, the Russian state precious metals and gems repository Gokran is planning to resume gold purchases next year. So that's going to start putting a crimp on physical. And it is amazing. There is a shortage of physical all over this country. People can't find it. They want to buy it. And yet because of these paper gold contracts, the prices are still being kept down. Whatever happened to supply and demand as a dominant force in the markets? We'll be right back.
Now the reckless men.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Andrew Tyree, chairman of the Parliamentary Commission on Banking Standards, has said that the latest round of banking legislation presented to Parliament yesterday was so weak that it's virtually useless. My goodness, we've seen a lot of that here in the United States. The bankers predate on all of us, impoverish us, strip us of our real wealth. The government stands up and says, if you vote us into office, we will rein them in. And they'll pass a bunch of laws that turn out to have so many loopholes, you could fly a Korean 777 through them. And so government seems to want to pretend they're taking care of the people, but they're not actually doing it. It's like where Obama's going on about how much he'd like to close Guantanamo. Well, he could do it in a heartbeat. It's a military facility. He is the commander-in-chief. He could pick up that phone and say, shut down Guantanamo now, and it would be done. Seeing another article, this is out of RINF.com. The sneaky game banking giants are playing to suck more money out of the foreclosure crisis. Remember Obama's foreclosure settlement where they headed off criminal investigations by all 50 states' attorneys general and said, don't investigate, don't arrest, we, the federal government, will take care of it. And they came up with this wrist-slap foreclosure fraud settlement where the average homeowner who had their home taken through fraud and criminality received a check for about $300 in exchange for their house. And some of those checks actually bounced. And because Wall Street was not punished for its criminality, and rarely is, they go on being criminal. They're continuing to do the same game all over again. And the reason is wealth confiscation to protect the banks. Because under the worldview of the United States government, banks, brick and mortar, fancy columns out front, and ink and paper are far more important to the nation than flesh and blood human beings. And they're doing wealth confiscation just like Roosevelt did back in 1933 with his gold grab, taking the real wealth of the people to give to the banks to prop them up and allow them to recover from their own failings, recklessness, greed, and criminality. And they're trying to do it in a way that makes the people who have lost their homes think it's their fault. Oh, you didn't make your mortgage payments. Well, you took the jobs away. That's somebody else's department. Interesting article over at firedoglake.com. Who decided there were no crimes in the MF Global collapse? Because it came out yesterday, Corzine is not going to be criminally charged for misusing depositors' money. Yes, it broke laws, but we've decided it wasn't really a crime in this case. Going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Stock markets are just about ready to close. They're up in the green, not significantly, but enough to keep all the money junkies happy and thinking the world will go on forever the way it is right now. We're always hearing this talk about recovery. The economy's recovering. Things are getting better. Just stay in your homes. Don't riot in the streets. Everything's getting better and better and better. And they always come up with these convenient numbers that say, hey, things are great. Joblessness is down and prosperity is up, which is true if you're part of the 1%. But for ordinary American people, it just isn't so. This last month's jobs report was a bit bogus. I mean, they're all bogus, but this was more so. They were talking about how there was an increase in the number of jobs, and what they didn't tell you is that in order to evade Obamacare, employers let go of almost 250,000 full-time employees and replace them with 2 and 3 temp workers. So the jobs numbers go up, but it doesn't actually mean more people are earning better livelihoods. Because now you've got these former full-time workers are having to go out and find 2 or 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet. And the government will count that as 3 jobs, but it's still only the one person. As we mentioned yesterday, the second largest employer in the entire country is a temporary agency. And when you look at what Americans are actually able to earn, the numbers are dismal. Right now, less than half of all Americans have a full-time job. 47%. Everybody else is scrounging or part-time jobs, and a huge number of young people just out of college and dealing with their student loans are having to take internships with large corporations. These are unpaid positions where they go and work and do what they're told and basically are treated as the lowest of the low for 6 months in order to get a chance at an actual paying job for that company, to prove that they can bow and scrape and be obedient and not question authority with their college degree. But looking at the median income for U.S. households in 2013, it's in major, major decline. That's not a recovering economy. That's not an improving economy. The economy is not supposed to serve just the 1%, just the money junkies, just the private central bankers. A properly run economy serves everybody. It fuels commerce. That was the model the Founding Fathers set up when they started this country, the public currency as a public utility, and not a privatized money-making venture for a bunch of money junkies. And the abuses are continuing out there. Over at theconsumers.com, they're reporting on how Expert Global Solutions, this is the largest debt collection operation in the world, just got fined $3.2 million for harassing their customers. Now, there are laws that say what debt collection agencies can and cannot do. And this debt collection agency was just flagrantly violating all of those, and they got caught on it. But a $3.2 million fine may sound like a lot of money to you and me, and it is, but to a company this large, it's a wrist slap. They'll take it off their taxes as a loss of business, and they'll just keep on going here. Now, when we come back from this next commercial break, I want to talk about this documentary that HBO ran last night. And I do have to tip my hat to HBO for some of these world-class documentaries they produced, like Hacking Democracy, Smartest Guys in the Room. They just do a phenomenal job on getting these important documentaries out there. And when we come back from this commercial break, we're going to be talking about Gasland Part 2. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And last night on HBO, Claire and I watched this documentary called Gasland Part 2. It's the second in a series of documentaries covering the subject of fracking. Now, fracking is the name given to a process used by natural gas producers to drill a well and then pump into the well under high pressure this soup of chemicals designed to weaken rock and fracture it under pressure, under hydraulic pressure, in order to free pockets of natural gas that can then be sucked up to the surface and sold for business, commercial, and residential use. And it sounds like a really good idea, except fracking causes problems. Seismic instability being one of them, and groundwater contamination. Now, we've covered this topic before at whatreallyhappened.com, but this documentary, Gasland Part 2, hammers home the point. This is not something happening to a few isolated communities. It is happening all across America. Now, needless to say, the corporate media are out there this morning attacking the documentary and reassuring us all that fracking is 100% safe. Of course, they're saying the same thing about GMO foods and, frankly, after that whopper about Saddam's nuclear weapons, who listens to the corporate media anyway? But as the Huffington Post correctly points out, the tactics being used to silence critics of fracking bear an eerie similarity to those used by Big Tobacco to silence those who were pointing out there seemed to be a link between cigarettes and cancer. And we know how abusive they were about that. So we have controlled institutions like Daily Kos and NBC. They're picking at it, trying to discredit it, saying, oh, this is happening way too deep. We're way below where the water is. And apparently the documentary maker, while he was making this, Josh Cox, was actually arrested trying to film the House Science Committee hearing on fracking. It was another one of these hearings like they had for SSRIs, where they have hearings and discuss it, and they decide they're not going to do anything because they don't want to piss off these really huge donors in the big oil. And it's a huge fight. And we were reporting, I think it was about a week ago, where the EPA simply dropped and abandoned the study they were conducting on fracking's contamination of groundwater. Just said, we don't need to look anymore. Clearly they didn't like what they were finding. My question has always been, if you want to frack and take the risk of triggering earthquakes, which is a known, demonstrated phenomenon with this kind of activity, why not use just fresh water? Where if you're leaking into the public aquifer, it's no big deal. You're adding water to water. What is the harm? But looking at the list of the chemicals they are putting down there to break the rock apart and get the natural gas, known carcinogens like benzene, and this documentary was showing all these people suffering these horrible medical ailments. You remember the big stink out at Hinckley, California, where Pacific Gas and Electric was improperly storing and dumping hexavalent chromium and poisoned this entire town? It was the case that made Aaron Brockovich famous. That was one town. This is across the entire United States of America. And we have a government that is so dedicated to allowing corporations to make money, they are turning a completely blind eye to the very demonstrable harm they are causing to the American people. I guess the attitude is, yeah, if these chemicals make them sick, that's okay. Big Pharma will sell them a medicine to make them feel better. Won't cure them, but it'll make the symptoms go away. And so it's igniting a huge controversy, and some of what I saw in this Gasland Part 2, even though I've been following the fracking story, some of it was quite shocking to me. I mean, they have this homeowner who built himself a really nice home in a nice location. The fracking came in, and now when he turns on a hose, he can light it with his cigarette lighter. Because when they frack the rock to free the methane, the natural gas, they don't suck it all up into that well. Much of it just leaks up through the soil and gets into the water. And it's just a horrific situation here. We have a government that is perfectly comfortable with poisoning the American people at large in order for the gas companies to make more money and produce more product. And my question is, a generation from now, when the American people are too sick to go to work and pay for a natural gas pipe into their house, who are they going to sell the natural gas to? They're not thinking long term. And I see it as a symptom of the driving of the United States down to third world status. You go out to these third world nations where they're breaking up used computer gear, and just it doesn't matter where the toxic smoke goes, just huge environmental damage. And my advice to you is don't take my word for it. Certainly don't take Daily Kos or NBC's word for it. Hunt this show down for yourself. It's on HBO. I'm sure they're going to show it again. In fact, I looked in the guide. It's scheduled for rebroadcast several times in the coming weeks. This one you must see. Gasland Part 2. We already know how this government is turning a blind eye to the abuses of dangerous pharmaceutical drugs. We've already seen how this government is turning a willful blind eye to the dangers of genetically modified food. Is it not predictable they would turn an equally blind eye to the dangers of this fracking, where they're pumping toxic chemicals down into the ground and just sort of say, hey, there's no way it's going to contaminate your local water supplies? And the lack of concern for ordinary people, I think, was demonstrated best by the fact that this town, whose natural ground well water had been destroyed by this fracking, wanted the government and the oil company to run in a water pipeline from another municipal water supply system that was safe, and they said, nah, we don't need to do that. We're sure. You know, some people are just going to be more sensitive to these chemicals than others. So these people are being asked to drink benzene water. And the EPA came into the town and said, actually, no, you can't use this water. You can't bathe in it, can't cook in it, can't drink it, can't even water your lawn with it, or your lawn might explode. You were talking about this one homeowner was literally having to bring a tank truck of water onto his property every month at $1,000 a month because the well on his property was contaminated. This is a far worse scandal than what happened in Hinckley. And Big Oil is out there fighting tooth and nail, trying to make sure you don't understand what's going on here. So you got to see it. Gasland Part 2. That's your homework assignment. There'll be a pop quiz next class period here. All righty. So, interesting story coming out of the Wall Street Journal saying that research is now showing that attention deficit hyperactivity disorder drugs don't actually improve students' schoolwork and grades. Now, we already know the guy who came up with ADHD, shortly before he passed away, he went public and said, it's a made-up illness. We made it up to sell pills. When I was a kid, we called it teacher is boring me. And these drugs were being prescribed and sold to kids. Oh, it'll keep them focused. They'll be better students. They actually called them cognitive enhancers, because it improves attention, concentration, and certain types of memory. But as the Wall Street Journal now admits, a growing body of research finds that in the long run, these kids on ADHD drugs aren't doing any better than kids who are not taking these medications. It's just another money-making opportunity, all based on a fraud. We're going to take a phone call here. Barb in Texas. Aloha, Barb. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. Barb from Lake Worth, Florida. I watched that Gasland 2 last night, coincidentally, and very informative. Everybody really needs to see it because I kept on, you know, I know that girl Crawford. You remember she
I
was
remember her.
against, yeah, she was against the pipeline cutting across her land, and she says that those pipes are not thick enough, they're dangerous, they need valves throughout them to when the, you know, when they're about to blow up or something, that the valve would keep it from blowing up, that type of thing. That's how I got familiar with it. But this is this Josh Fox. He lives in Pennsylvania, and he talked about, I think it was 2 or 3 different parts of the United States where, you know, just 100 feet or 200 feet from people's homes, they're doing this drilling, and it's just criminal.
It absolutely is, because as you point out, this documentary did show the quality of construction of the wellheads and the pipelines, because they're gathering natural gas from hundreds and hundreds of these wells, and so they're cutting costs. They're using cheap piping, cheap seals, and they showed where even the pipes themselves in the wellheads are leaking methane into the atmosphere, which is, by the way, that's a greenhouse gas more potent than carbon dioxide. And, you know, where's Al Gore when you really need him on that one? And you're absolutely right. They're cutting costs on safety systems like emergency cutoff valves in case there's a pipe rupture. It's the same mindset we saw down in the Gulf of Mexico at the Deepwater Horizon, where the U.S. government... we got to take a break for commercials. Barb, stay with me. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the HBO documentary Gasland 2, the second in a series, talking about the incredible dangers to the environment and human life caused by the process of fracking to obtain natural gas from shale formations. And we're talking here with Barb in Texas. And Barb, before I get back to you, first of all, we're already getting emails on this. Let's see. One of them says, "Is this release of gas into the air that makes birds fall out of the sky in masses?" We've been hearing about strange bird die-offs. Kills masses of fish schools. And yes, there's no question, when these chemicals get into the streams and lakes, it kills the indigenous life there. In fact, I seem to recall during Gasland where they were saying there was this one area where they used to go and fish and get food, and now they can't. If they eat anything out of these contaminated streams and rivers, it will make them ill. And so it's a huge, huge problem. And what you were saying about the lack of safety systems on these pipes reminds me very much of what happened down in the Gulf of Mexico, where, first of all, virtually every other nation that has undersea oil drilling mandates the use of a piece of equipment called an acoustic blowout preventer. This is a device that sits at the wellhead on the ocean floor listening for giant gas bubbles, which, if they're allowed to simply run away, can lead to pressures and impacts that will destroy the drilling platform. But in the United States of America, in the Gulf of Mexico, these devices are not mandated. They cost about $500,000 each, and those big oil executives see their own bonuses dwindling if they actually have to buy safety gear. Plus, of course, it came out that on the Deepwater Horizon, the manual blowout preventer was 4 years overdue for its regularly scheduled maintenance. And the U.S. government's Minerals Management Service, that's supposed to keep an eye on this stuff, had been basically partying with the drilling operators and letting them fill out their own paperwork and just taking it and rubber stamping it, taking their federal government paychecks and thinking it was all a really cool way to earn a living. And so now we're seeing the same situation. You have literally millions of these natural gas pipelines along the surface of most of America, and they're operating without these emergency shut-off valves, where if a pipe ruptures and the gas flows into the atmosphere, it's basically you have the potential for a giant fuel-air explosion, or certainly a runaway fire. Barb, have anything to add?
Yeah, a lot of corruption involved. In the one in Pennsylvania, the drilling there, Governor Ridge, former governor, he's the speaker or the lobbyist for Marcellus Shale. And the present governor, Governor Corbett, got a campaign contribution of $1 million from Cabot. I'm not sure, Governor Corbett, I think he's in Pennsylvania. I can't keep up with this. But I know the former Governor Rendell made a deal, according to Josh Fox, with the EPA. So there's a lot of corruption involved. In fact, when Corbett repealed the moratorium on drilling in 2009, he hired Hill and Knowlton to do a campaign, and they were the ones who did the campaign of the tobacco con job.
Well, so, Hill and Knowlton was also the public relations firm that came up with that phony Kuwaiti nurse and that story about stolen incubators that helped sell the first Iraq war on to the American people. So they're professional liars, and they're very good at it, and they make a huge amount of money from various governments and corporations to lie and deceive the American people.
Yeah, I recommend see it once or twice. While I have you on the phone, Mike, I also want to mention something I saw on the Huckabee last night. The huckster, you know.
Yes.
But anyway, he must be waking up. because I know he was so pro-illegal alien in the past. He had a good segment on that. But he also had a segment on the White River Blueways in the Ozarks and 25 places throughout the United States. They're trying to develop these blueways that take over a whole entire ecosystem. And the day before the 4th, I guess it was July 3rd, the Department of Interior dropped the plans to create the White River Blueways in the Ozarks. And that would have been Missouri and Arkansas. And that would have been, you know, regulating everything down to the puddle in your yard within that, you know, whole basin there, in other words.
Well,
so
you know, we're seeing the symptoms of a government that wants to prove they're concerned about the environment by telling you that you can't collect raindrops on your own property, and then they turn around and they allow this complete reckless disregard for the environment by these large corporations. Apparently up in Indiana, British Petroleum just got the okay to go on dumping mercury into Lake Michigan. This was signed off by the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. So they're going to come around to your home and say, clean up that trash and don't abuse this bird, to make it look like they're concerned about the environment. But when you look at the scale of this fracking scandal, it is obvious environmental concerns are subordinate to corporate profitability, and that, of course, is a hallmark of a fascist economic state. Barb, we're going to have to let you go here. We've got a bunch of other callers waiting on the line. Apparently, this is turning into a hot topic, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. Apparently, a lot of people are very upset about fracking, and they should be, because your basic water filtration system isn't going to get these chemicals out of the water once it's contaminated. And of course, once your aquifer is contaminated, there's no way to clean it up. Even distillation is not going to make the water safe to drink, because many of these chemicals have a lower boiling point than water itself. This is a very reckless way of deploying this technology with no concern whatsoever for any other aspect than the next stockholders report. We're going to go to Chip in North Carolina. Aloha, Chip. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike. I've been thinking about this for a while now, but if you're a big company and you have a lot of toxic material that you need to get rid of, and nobody's checking what fracking, you know, there's no regulations on what you can put down there, wouldn't you put all your leftover waste, everything down the well?
Yeah, if there's no oversight, we don't know what's going on down there. We know the military does it all the time. That's how the link between pumping stuff into fault systems and earthquakes was discovered out at 29 Palms back, I think it was the late 1980s. The Marines decided to use this convenient earthquake fault to just basically get rid of this toxic sludge from weapons development, and they started pumping in there, and immediately they got a swarm of quakes. And they began to realize that, yes, it would not take much pressure at all to trigger an earthquake in a fault zone. And here they're creating the faults as they go along. And, yeah, we don't know what they're putting on down there. The companies want to keep the list of chemicals they're using for fracking secret. And we don't know why these chemicals are even in there. We saw lists of them on this documentary. Maybe some of them are just industrial wastes where somebody said, hey, throw this in the mix and pump it on down there. We need to get rid of it. Can't rule that out.
I remember, maybe this was on your website a month or two ago, but a fracking truck came through a dump, and they actually got triggered for radiation. You know, they quarantined it and locked it down. But you know, I think a way to maybe figure out what's getting dumped down there would be, you know, these corporations there's dump wells that have been, you know, for decades, that, you know, sites thousands of these throughout the country where they can legally dump chemicals and stuff under the ground, supposedly, again, underneath the aquifer. But I'd be curious to know if the applications for these alternative dump sites have gone down with fracking, and that would explain.
That would be a very interesting thing to look at.
And I'd be curious to see how much lower that number is now with fracking going up. And, you know, it'd be cheaper to just dump it down the fracking fluid than actually pay for a permit and have to do the research on geography and figure out if it's safe or not, and just dump it down with the fracking fluid.
Well,
that's all I got, Mike.
Okay, well, there's also that aspect down with these collapsing sinkholes down in Florida into these salt domes, which were being used for storing toxic materials, including radioactive waste. and now we're finding out they're not geologically stable, and they're just opening up, and all that stuff is coming out. But you raise a very good point. I think I would like to get hold of that list of these chemicals that are in the fracking fluids that was shown in Gasland 2, and see how many of them are considered waste products. Because if you think back to the campaign to introduce fluoridation to America's water, you need to remember that just before that, fluoride was considered a toxic waste byproduct of uranium enrichment for nuclear weapons development. It was piling up, and it was very toxic, and they said, oh, we'll just put it in the drinking water, we'll tell them that it fixes their tooth decay, and that way we'll spread it out all across the country, and there won't be any single points where it's considered toxic. But that's how that got done, and you raise a very, very good possibility. How many of these chemicals in this fracking soup being poured down into these wells are actually just diverted industrial waste. And
we should be able to figure out if the applications for dump sites have gone down, put 2 and 2 together.
Yeah, that's a good thing to look into. That's definitely very good.
All right.
All right, Chip.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. We're going to let you go. Switch over to Art in Philadelphia. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Thank you for taking my call. I was going to reiterate what Barb talked about with regards to Pennsylvania's fracking. The one who won all the contracts is none other than Tom Corbett's power broker, which is a guy named Robert Asher, head of the Pennsylvania Republican Party, national committee man, who's also the convicted felon when our state treasurer blew his brains out on TV. He's getting all the no-bid contracts with Halliburton for all the fracking contracts in the Marcellus Shale.
There's that Halliburton name again.
Right. And it so happens that Bob Asher, the convicted felon, when Bud Dreyer blew his brains out on TV, is none other than the power broker for Tom Ridge. You go figure. There's a website called NoPlaceForCorruption.com that shows the actual details, and people can look at this issue. But you can trace this kind of, how would you say, underhanded corruption going straight back to the JFK assassination. It is the exact same power structure.
Well, I'll definitely look at that, and I'm looking at that website you just mentioned to me. Oh, my goodness.
Corruption.com.
All right. I will take a look at that and post a link to that. There we are. Okay, there we are. Anything else, Art?
I think you're doing a good job until people start getting irate and basically tar and feather the politicians that are selling us down the rat hole. Nothing changes.
All right. Well, absolutely. Thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Danny in South Carolina. Aloha, Danny. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Well, I've just been listening what you guys been saying about you were talking to John earlier about World War III, and you've been talking about fracking and oil, and I just wanted to make a weak attempt here tying these dots together, because one of the things that I've been following here is the slow takeover of American oil companies, in fact, worldwide oil companies, by Israeli companies. And I notice now that they're probably the single largest entity in Texas. I mean, they don't own any of the oil companies outright, but they own enough pieces of all the different oil companies to make them the largest entity in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of complexity here in these regulations that I'm trying to understand, but basically the U.S. government has contracted us to help Israel pay for these acquisitions, for lack of a better term, and because we are compelled to help them pay for their energy needs. And as you know, Israel does not have their own oil. They have their own natural gas, but they do not have their own oil supply.
Well, they used to. Back when the Shah was in charge of Iran, there was a pipeline from Iran to Israel, ostensibly for a tanker loading terminal in Haifa, but Israel just dipped all the oil they wanted out of that pipeline, and that's another reason why they would like Iran to be conquered and put back under the control of a new Shah.
Well, of course it is. It's also the reason why they won't budge on the Gaza Strip, because there's a handful of operating oil wells that they've drilled. I say operating, they're not in full production, but they're productive, and they're off the coast of Gaza.
So there's also a natural gas field there. Israel's been caught slant drilling into the natural gas fields off the coast of Lebanon. Huge amount of friction, and Israel's attitude is their borders actually go up and down the length of the coast, and so the entire eastern Mediterranean is rightfully theirs. I mean, that's kind of the attitude they're displaying for this whole thing.
Oh, of course, but if Gaza, if Palestine ever gets this statehood, of course, then there'll be no argument for Israel to own that oil anyway. But my alarm is that we are passing legislation that appears to indicate that we are committed to Israel's exploitations in this area. And why in the world, I mean, what business, why is our government making these statements that we are going to give them whatever they need to get their own energy independence? You know,
well, it goes back a long way. I mean, it's U.S. law that the United States guarantees Israel's oil and gas needs, even if it causes shortages here in the United States. That's actually been around for over 10 years. And it's just another way that our government is continually placing Israel above the American people. And you're absolutely right. Congress is sending all these billions of dollars to Israel, ostensibly because they're weak and helpless and being victimized. Israel is now openly admitting they're the world's 6th largest nuclear power, and yet our government continues to send them U.S. tax dollars every year, a violation of U.S. law to do so, because it's under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act, under the Glenn Act, it is illegal for the U.S. government to send your tax dollars to any nation in possession of nuclear weapons technology that refuses to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or allow IAEA inspections. And yet the money continues to flow from your pocket into Israel's, and then they turn around and they come back and they buy the best American companies and take them over. Intel, good example, began in the United States. Now their main R&D center is in Israel.
I want to urge all your listeners to take a few minutes and look up Senate Bill 462, read it, and then call your people and tell them, do not pass this bill.
Well, I wish our politicians would listen to the people, but in a nation with rampant epidemic voter fraud, or rather election fraud, our government doesn't feel they need to listen to the American people anymore. They listen to those who give them huge amounts of money or those who are able to blackmail them. And sometimes I wonder if all these American politicians who go on their obligatory trip to Israel to launch their campaign in the United States of America, Israel drugs them and takes a video of them having sex with a farm animal in order to control them from then on out, because it always seems every time one of these politicians comes back from Israel, oh yes, we got to do this for Israel, we've got to do that for Israel, and the American people are out there saying, hey, take care of us, and the government's attitude is, I'm sorry, was somebody saying something? And
yes,
we've really had enough of that.
Michael, you're doing a great job. I don't know what we'd do without you. Keep it up.
All right, I will, as soon as I'll keep it up as long as I can. And apparently I'm getting a lot of email and a lot of member posts about this fracking and the fracking chemicals. And I think it's valid at this point to ask how many of these fracking chemicals are actually useful to the process versus how many of them are just a convenient way to dump toxic waste into the environment without being seen by the American people. And I think that's a line of inquiry we definitely need to follow. All right, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Dan the Man is in the control room for the remainder of our show. And obviously this is a subject we're going to come back to. It's generating a huge amount of interest. And again, the eye-opener for me last night, because I was aware of this controversy of fracking, but this HBO documentary Gasland 2 shows it's all over the United States, Pennsylvania, Appalachia, all across Texas, all across the Midwest, West Coast. There are people who were saying that the very surprise, strange earthquake that damaged the Washington Monument appeared to originate in a formation that had been undergoing fracking for quite some time. We know from what happened out at 29 Palms that pumping fluid into fault systems under high pressure can trigger earthquakes. Small price to pay for natural gas. Meanwhile, other countries are getting into thorium cycle nuclear reactors, which could solve the energy crisis. But our current big oil mentality and our government is all about keeping us using this 19th century technology as long as possible. We don't want to move into the future. That'll upset the apple cart. We don't want new forms of energy because the people with the old forms of energy will cry. And they'll stop signing those checks to our politicians, the finest government money can buy. All righty, let's see. Down in Perth, Australia, there's a family that is suing the pharmaceutical company CSL Limited after their daughter became severely disabled after receiving the flu vaccine Fluvax in 2010. And we're seeing more and more of these all over the place. Little article of warning, this came out of naturalnews.com, saying that you need to avoid Obamacare any way you can because along with purchasing the government-mandated health insurance coverage, you place yourself in the care of government-directed medical care, which we all know favors pumping drugs into you and surgery and radiation rather than nutrition and prevention. And by the way, Obama has now delayed 9 whole provisions of Obamacare until after next year's midterm elections. Doesn't want you realizing just how you're going to be slammed financially for all of this. And remember, we had Nancy Pelosi out there saying, nobody said your health care costs were going to go down. They're robbing you blind and making you sick. It's the new normal in the fascist states of America. We've been talking a lot about how pollen from Monsanto's unapproved wheat, GMO wheat, test plots, apparently escaped into the wild, crossed America all the way up to Oregon. Now we've got foreign buyers for American wheat canceling their contracts. Huge financial damage to American wheat farmers. Apparently, the USDA back in 2006 and 2007 detected traces of 3 varieties of unapproved GM rice contaminating the general rice supply in the United States. They were not able to contain it. Maybe they didn't want to. Maybe Monsanto and this other company, Bayer Crop Science, which is another major player in GM, they want their pollen to get out because then all of the rice and all of the wheat and all of the corn and everything is their patented products and they can monopolize food production. They don't want you to have natural varieties of products, natural varieties of crops and animals. And I think a good illustration of that goes back to this horrific exercise of government power up in Michigan, where there's this family farm that raises a feral species of pig, a natural variety of pig. They are being threatened with a fine of $700,000 for raising this particular type of pigs because it has been declared an invasive species. Now, these are the pigs that have always been there. And the whole purpose of this exercise is to protect these hybridized, interbred pigs that are basically encouraged along for greater meat and productivity and are the property of large corporations. Now, to the best of our knowledge, they're not GMO, but they are the product of generations of hybridization to bring qualities from this pig into this other pig and make them more appropriate for pig farming and commercial pork production. This farmer wants to raise a natural variety of pig. The government has said, oh no, that's an invasive species. It's getting in the way of these corporate-owned pigs, and they're threatening him with a $700,000 fine. So a farmer faces ruin for raising a natural breed of pig, while Monsanto has leaked their GMO pollen all over the nation, and nothing happens. Probably Monsanto has a Roundup-ready pig to sell that farmer on credit. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And one of our listeners just sent me a list of the most commonly used chemicals in fracking fluid. And I'm going to read you some of them because this stuff, if it gets into the aquifer and into your tap water, it is going to hurt you. Hydrochloric acid, which is there to basically dissolve the rock and make it easier to break it. Glutaraldehyde. Quaternary ammonium chloride. These are bacterial killers to kill bacteria that produce corrosive byproducts to protect the pipelines here. Ammonium persulfate, sodium chloride, that's just salt. Magnesium peroxide, magnesium oxide, that's actually fairly harmless. Calcium chloride, it's another salt that you're used to. Choline chloride, tetramethyl ammonium chloride, isopropanol, methanol, that's grain alcohol, formic acid. Formic acid is what ants sting you with to cause pain. That's what formic acid is. Petroleum distillate is a carrier fluid. That could be pretty much anything. Hydrotreated light petroleum distillate, potassium metaborate, triethanolamine, one more time, triethanolamine zirconate, sodium tetraborate, boric acid, zirconium complex, it's kind of a fuzzy name there. Ethylene glycol. This is a chemical with known health consequences. Exposure, human exposure is regulated. Hydrotreated light petroleum distillate, more methanol, Gower gum. Let's see what else is down here. Polysaccharide blend, more ethylene glycol, citric acid, well, it's vitamin C. Acetic acid, that's vinegar. Sodium erythrobate, lauryl sulfate, that's another chemical that you're not supposed to be exposed to. Sodium hydroxide, acetic acid again. Copolymer of acrylamide and sodium acrylate. Naphthalene, they make mothballs out of that. Isopropyl alcohol, and on and on and on and on. But this is the list of chemicals admitted to be in the fracking fluid. And as that caller points out, they could be throwing stuff in there that somebody just wants to get rid of and is willing to pay money to get rid of, and pumping it down into the ground. And even with just the acknowledged chemicals, the risk to public health is demonstrable. And we're going to be paying a little more attention to this, I think. Alrighty, we're coming up here on the end of the show, and I imagine it's a little daunting and depressing to see just how wrong this country has gone under the kind ministrations of the money junkies. This is clearly not the nation intended by the Founding Fathers. It is clearly not the nation we were all brainwashed in public schools to think we lived in. And again, if you have HBO, Gasland 2, please make a point of catching this and sharing it with your friends. This is a national scandal. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay skeptical, stay angry, make good choices. Please support Republic Broadcasting. We need your help. Go to republicbroadcasting.org. Hit that donate button. We're not getting big bucks from the oil companies. I'm sure you're aware of that right now. Aloha, America.